Pygmalion. Okay, let me just tell you the very brief summary. Give you the brief summary of the story. I think the modern version of Pygmalion could be like Pretty Woman, where a man reshaped a woman. Or another 19th century version of Pygmalion could be 科学怪人 Frankenstein, where a scientist creates a human being out of the bits and pieces of corpses and everything. Okay, so in other words, Pygmalion has to do with creating another person or changing another person. And in this case, Pygmalion is a sculptor, and he declares that he does not love women. But then, he falls in love with his own sculpture, Galatea. Okay, and then he starts to caress her and give her gifts, putting all of his attention on this woman, on this sculpture, until finally Venus realized his wish and turned Galatea into a real woman. Okay, of course, Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion is not like a literal rendering of the myth. He changes it a lot. So the question here for you to bear in mind is who is the Pygmalion in this play? Or are there several Pygmalions? Okay, and the subtitle of the play is called A Romance in 5 Acts. Okay, and why is it called romance? Okay, and then of course you need to read the sequel or the postscript, to understand how Bernard Shaw looks at it. Okay, so for your reference, romance can be defined differently in different historical periods. In the medieval time, romance is seen as, depicting the adventure, into the realm of like the fairyland, or with experience. Sorry, there's a typo here. With experience of the improbable, like the knights with the support of the fairies or the trolls, etc. And then in the 19th century, romance becomes adventures. Okay, like Walter Scott. Remember in Arabic, there's a mentioning of Walter Scott. Out of the 3 books, 1 book was written by Walter Scott. He wrote novels which are romance, historical romances. Okay, and then in the 20th century, romance become love story. Okay, so that's why romance itself, is written with different definitions. And then in reading this play, we'll need to find out why Pygmalion is a romance, or in what sense is it a romance. Does it just deal with the improbable, or does it involve adventure, or is it also a love story? Okay, so these are the 3 ideas or 3 definitions of romance you have to keep in mind. Okay, the main theme of the story, language, class, and education. Let me show you briefly 2 versions of the film. The filmic adaptation. Okay, but here, with 2 clips, I guess you know that in this play, as well as the musical, the main themes, is the usual language, and how language can or cannot tell class differences, and then how Eliza, and as well as several minor characters, transform themselves through learning good languages, or having good languages, etc. Okay, so these are indeed the 3 main themes in this play. So just a little bit of historical background for your reference. In the 19th century, the standard English, the so-called standard English, is called Queen's English. It's rather different from King's English. I think I have it here. Yeah, King's English is a standard English in written form. Queen's English is more of the oral form, being set up as a model, for being classy, being well-mannered. If you want to be well-mannered, you need to speak in Queen's English. But the language that Eliza speaks in is so-called Cockney English. And it's a bit like Taiwanese, maybe in 20 years ago, where Taiwanese, speaking in Taiwanese or with Taiwanese accent will be seen as a sign of coarseness. The same thing with Cockney English. It's denoting how people don't have education. And that's why for Higgins, Eliza's English is a disgrace. Is a disgrace not only to herself, but also to English language itself. Okay. And then Higgins has this profession of teaching people how to speak or telling the origins of people's speeches, people's places by listening to them. Because in this 19th century, after industrialism, there is also another phenomenon, which is the rise of the middle classes. That because of the money they earn, they start to be able to imitate the upper classes. They are so rich that they can even buy them some titles to become gentleman, lady, etc., etc. Okay, and to look classy, sometimes they imitate two things. One is the manners, the way they are dressed, the way they have tea, like at home days, etc. And the other thing is the accent, the language of the upper class. Okay, at the same time, the upper class tries very hard to maintain their status, although some of them are losing their money. Because upper class is hereditary, 就是以遗传的，传承的。Okay, so they can use up their property. They don't work, and they can use up their property. So they use their family history, their social graces, the old traditions, to try to maintain their status. But then there can be some people who are the so-called poor aristocrat, who have good manners, but who don't have money to maintain the good manners, to open parties, to have tea parties, etc. And in this play, you'll get to see examples of the poor aristocrats too. Okay. Okay, let me skip this. Basically, Queen's English is dominant in the 19th century, but not really now. It is said. Actually, I don't have any ears for different accents. I'm very poor with pronunciation, so I also don't have an ear for accents. But it's said that Queen Elizabeth speaks in Queen's English, but not all of her family members. Like even Princess Di and Prince Edward, they speak a mixture of received pronunciation, and that's Queen's English and Cockney. Okay, so Queen's English is no longer as important. Likewise, there are different forms of Englishes, like Hong Kongese English, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Caribbean English, Canadian English, etc. Okay, related issue mentioned in the preface is the idea of phonetics as well as a branch of science. Higgins, like Bernard Shaw, believes in the importance of science and believes in the importance of being scientific. One thing that Higgins complains about English is that its phonetic system is not scientific. Like the F sound can be equivalent to the F alphabet or PH, and that's an example of how English is. There's no scientific system of the alphabet corresponding to the sounds. And that's one main thing that Higgins, Bernard Shaw, as well as several phoneticians at that time complained about. And they think that it is this reason that makes English so filled with different accents. Because people can pronounce it differently. Like Bernard Shaw, Bernard Shaw. Brother Cost pronounces it as Bernard Shaw, but Bernard Shaw, and I tend to pronounce it as Bernard Shaw. Okay, so I think this is the idea of the variation of the pronunciation, which you get to see a lot in English language and maybe in different languages too. Okay, so Bernard Shaw believes that science can or phonetics, the learning of phonetics can improve English language. Of course, then the question here is Henry Higgins as a scientist. Is he the hero in the play? Is he the only Pygmalion in this play? So that's something you can keep in mind. In the preface, basically the song you hear, you just heard, comes from the preface. In the play itself, Higgins does not go into such a long speech, which is just impossible in a play. But and also that's a difference between musical and a play. Musical, they can go into a song, to elaborate on some ideas. Okay, so here Bernard Shaw has a very famous saying, that the English have no respect for their language, and nor do they teach their children to speak it. Okay, so this is how the preface starts. So you can read a few sentences, and first few sentences to get this idea, and then he talks about how in their society there are some reformers of English. He said that they need an adjective phonetic enthusiast. So the preface seems to suggest that Higgins is the one he wants. Okay, but when you get to read the play, you will see that Bernard Shaw actually criticizes Higgins a lot in the play. He's aware that Higgins is a little bit like Henry Sweet, the real historical phonetician, who is very passionate about English language, and who has also his own system, who looks down upon the popular system and call it a pitfall system, 陷阱 system. But then Henry Sweet, like Henry Higgins, also does not have manners. Can be very impolite, very unsociable, etc., etc. And then Bernard Shaw also said that the play is didactic. So he doesn't mind conveying ideas. He thinks that the play should be intensely and deliberately didactic. But towards the end, after we finish the whole play, we can discuss how didactic it is, and whether it is so didactic that it becomes dry as textbook, okay, etc. And finally, he also wants to argue that Eliza's change is not impossible nor uncommon. It is happening a lot in his society. Okay, so these are the main ideas in the preface.